Hello, YouTube! Today we're going to be going over a build around one of the new weapons in the third vault card. And this build is going to be called the Ice Dragon's Fury. So with that, let's go ahead and get on into the build. So the biggest thing that we're building around today is the Blade Fury. We did get a masher version from our good friend B Flattened. So we're going to be working with this gun. The best thing about this gun is that it does both melee and weapon damage, which is really fun to work around and have some fun with. So that's kind of the idea of what we're working with here, is we're going to be using some melee damage and some gun damage to just kind of have some fun with this gun. So the big thing I'm using for these is the kill stack anoint, because we are going to be running a Ties That Bind. But for bossing, I like to switch over to either the Phase Slam or the Phase Cast Anoint, just because it gives you a little bit more solid bossing when you don't have any mobs around to get that extra kill stack damage going. I'm using a Free Radical for URAD, so basically anytime we're going into Fight for Your Life, Free Radical is going to be our typical gun to use in that. You can still use the Fury Masher, but it just doesn't seem to be as great in Fight for Your Life. So Free Radical is going to be our go-to for Fight for Your Life. And as usual, I have an EMP5 on here just because speed. So because we're going to be doing a lot of melee, I wanted to go with freezing enemies. Frozen Heart, with its vast size of its Nova, is just one of the best shields for freezing. So we went with that with the Action Skill Start Anoint. We're using the Fish Slap so that we can take advantage of some of that melee damage. And the Fish Slap, with all of the different things it does in its damage formula, is just the most powerful melee grenade. So we went with that, and giving ourselves some extra radiation damage on Action Skill End for that. We're using two different comms. So we're using the Dragon, because whenever you get a melee kill, so whenever you kill an enemy with a melee attack, which our Blade Fury is going to count for, you activate the skill Augment. What's really great about that with this recent update is that Expedite is fixed. So we'll go over what Expedite is in just a second, but using Expedite with this is just fantastic for your cooldown. With doing melee, I wanted to make sure I had melee damage on there. Splash damage radius for the Frozen Heart. It went with weapon damage as our third one, because we are benefiting from both weapon and melee with this gun. The Icebreaker is going to be the biggest part for whatever you decide to use. If the other exception to that is if you do want to use a Jacob's Company Man, it does work really well with this build. The Jacob's Company Man is just going to be great all around if you decide you don't want to go with all of that ice damage. So, Icebreaker is going to be the biggest thing if you're not going with the Company Man. I like to use the Victory Rush just because of extra damage from that. And I like to make sure I have melee damage just to increase everything with being frozen. So the biggest reason we want the Icebreaker is because it does extra damage to frozen enemies. Frozen enemies also take extra melee damage. Across from that, the only other things I'd really advise is either area of effect damage or radius, just again so that you can get some more benefits from your Frozen Heart. Anything else that's going to go on there, you could use a Face Puncher, is going to be great on here since you're going melee. The second comm that we're using is the Muse. Now I do use an old version from before it was patched, which basically you can only get one in Illuminated Fist. However, there was a issue when it first came out that you could get 3 in Illuminated Fist. So I've always just kept my level 65 around so that there is +3 in Illuminated Fist. And this one happened to have splash damage, melee, and cooldown rate on it. However, if you don't have one of these just sitting around, and you're not on PC where you can grab the save file that will be in Discord, there's a link for that in the description box down below, you can use a level 72. You won't see as much damage, but overall it's not going to be like the end of the world kind of a thing. It's still going to be absolutely amazing for bossing. I personally like to go 3-1-1 setup for this. Make sure you have the Illuminated Fist on there. It's going to be your biggest thing. Of course, again, extra melee damage, extra splash damage is going to be great. I do like to try and make sure there's action skill cooldown on the Muse, just because you don't get any extra cooldown from using it. Now, for Hemo, I do like to switch out to the Knife Drain White Elephant, and that's just because it gives you some extra melee damage from your stickies that are going off, which are also being boosted by our splash damage extras. But the biggest thing is just because this is a great way to just keep yourself up during the fight. So with that, guys, let's go ahead and get into the skills. It's going to be a little different than what I normally would set up on a melee build, just because we are going some gun damage. So in Red Tree, we wanted to make sure we got down to sustainment, so that we had some extra lifesteal there. So we went 3 in steady hands for weapon handling and accuracy, 5 in a fusion because you get 40% of your damage, or your gun damage, as your element. So that helps out a lot with the Bladed Fury having no element. We can now change it over to cryo or corrosive or whatever our element is that we're matching with what we're fighting. 5 in Tempest, so that we can get some extra elemental damage and a little bit extra shock damage. We, of course, pick up Illuminated Fist for that extra melee damage. We take 1 in Wildfire, mainly just to get down the tree, but it is kind of nice to have that little bit of a chance to have extra spread. We take 1 in Dread, since we are using ties that bind the majority of the time, which is just overall going to increase our gun damage. 1 in Deep Well, so that we have a little bit larger mag size. 3 in Indiscriminate for all of those ricochets, which just give us extra damage. Overall, just one of Amara's best skills. And like I said, we want to make sure we get down to sustainment, so that we have extra lifesteal. Now in Green Tree, we want to take 3 in Personal Space. Now, if you weren't aware, unfortunately the Face Puncher doesn't work with Personal Space. However, the Bladed Fury does. So just getting that extra damage while the enemies are closer to you, or you go closer to them when you freeze them, is just really great. Just free extra damage. Wonderful. You can choose to go into Root to Rise instead of Clarity. Personally, I just really like to have Clarity because, if I'm running around doing whatever, just having that little bit of extra health regeneration is really nice. Or if you're in between areas before you start your next fight, you just have a little bit of passive health regeneration that's going. I personally prefer that over the extra max health. 5 into Arms Deal, and that's just to give us more splash damage and more splash damage radius for all of that freezing and frozen heart that we're using. Now, typically in a melee build, I'm going to go a little bit heavier into Purple Tree, but I wanted to get down to sustainment in the Red Tree, so we took out Burn Both Ends and the point into Free the Soul, so that we could get down to that. So we go into 5 out of 5 for No Mistakes in Nature. Just gives us extra melee damage whenever we do inflict a status. We take 5 out of 5 in Heavy Rain, so that we have faster projectile speed and more splash damage. Now, the Bladed Fury does shoot projectiles, so that part does help as well as the splash damage with this particular gun. Unweave the Rainbow is going to give us better damage overall whenever we are attacking frozen enemies, which is kind of the largest thing for mobbing for this build. We take 3 and go with the flow so that we have extra weapon damage and some movement speed whenever we freeze an enemy. 1 in Combo Breaker, so that anytime we do kill an enemy with a melee damage, we have a possibility of just resetting our action skill and using it again. And we take 5 out of 5 in Joyful Freedom, so that we just have extra melee damage anytime we do use our action skill. 3 in body and mind for the bonus splash damage, and 1 in clear the mind. And the biggest thing we wanted to do by getting down to clear the mind is to help out with those elemental resistances against cryo, since we are going to be pretty heavily leaning into cryo damage. And our last tree is our blue tree. We do 1 in do harm, which is going to give us extra action skill damage and of course extra stacks of rush. We do 3 out of 3 in fast hands, which gives us our increased reload speed. We don't really swap weapons, so we're not really too worried about that, and there's no mode switch. So really it's just the reload speed on this one. 1 in tapestry, which of course the 3 1-in-1 is going to be your typical way to get down blue tree here, so that you get your extra chances with your rush stacks, you get your extra rush stacks, and you get your better reload. So pretty typical blue for that. 5 for our action skill cooldown and restless. With our class mod, we've got that up to 35 since we had 2 extra points, which is really nice. And 3 in transcend so that we get some extra critical hit damage. Now, you could switch some things around here and there. If you don't want to go sustainment, say you want to, instead of running Expedite, you want to run Soul Sap, you could go a little bit further down into blue tree. Laid Bear is going to be really great, and Wrath, of course, is always going to give you some extra gun damage and do really great. So you might take out a couple points there just to get down to Wrath and Laid Bear. Now, the big part, Expedite. So Expedite originally was not working at all, so we didn't get any benefit from it. However, now that it is working, due to the recent patch that was dropped on Thursday the 18th of November, we can now get extra action skill cooldown rate. So basically it is whenever Amara kills an enemy with her action skill, she gains increased action skill cooldown rate until she activates it again. So with that being 30% per enemy killed, you can do some pretty fun things with that overall, especially in a melee build if you want to run it as phase cast, use your phase cast to kill a bunch of groups of enemies, and get cooldown back faster. Great thing overall. For this build, the reason that we go Expedite is because we are using the dragon. So whenever we get a kill with our melee attack with our dragon comm equipped, it activates our skill augment, which is Expedite. So we get that activated every time we're getting a melee kill now because of dragon. Now, as I like to point out in every build video, I do have all of the Guardian rank perks, so you can see a little bit of a difference if you don't have all of these unlocked. The biggest two you're going to see a difference in is Hollow Point and Groundbreaker. Those two can do some really crazy damage, especially with doing melee attacks. Because of the Bladed Fury, you'll see some more Groundbreaker procs, so if you don't have those, you will see a difference in some of your Guardian rank, or in your overall damage. With that, guys, I have been your local sassy SwinLaw. Stay classy, Pandora.